Welcome to the Space for It with Makayla and Jacob. We are two therapists working to navigate making space for what comes up as part of the human experience. And today, we're going to be talking about how to know whether or not mental health information shared across social media is accurate.
Big topic.
Very big topic. And there was very recently released a study that took 500 pieces of mental health content from TikTok that were, more specifically, they were all hashtagged with either mental health advice or mental health tips. And it looked at those 500 pieces of content and judged whether or not the information they gave was accurate or not. And the results that they came up with were fairly scathing. But before we dive into that, curious, Makayla?
Yeah.
Do you think that mental health information shared on social media is generally accurate or not?
And that's a general. So that's like is over 50% is kind of where my mind goes. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Like I know that I don't take a lot of or put a lot of credit into all of it by any means, but I do look at it for sure. And sometimes it hits the confirmation bias where I've already either learned something else and I'm like, okay, at least one piece of this post is accurate, so maybe I take the rest of it a little bit more easily than if it comes across as something that is unfamiliar to me. And I have seen a lot of like counselors too put like, this is not mental health advice, this is generalities or things like that. So there are people who try and make that distinction in that space. Like, this doesn't qualify as like mental health. I don't know what the word is, support or things that way. So, and then there's people who are just straight up like, here it is. Like, this is what you do. And yeah, very mixed, very mixed.
Even in just how you're talking about it, I can hear kind of the ambiguity of it all.
Yes.
Because, I mean, there's so much content out there, and it's over such a broad range of information about mental health and about people in the human experience, and it's provided by a wide variety of people, from the 18-year-old armchair therapist coach to the highly credentialed, like the Gottmans are on there, or people like that, who it's like they've been studying this for years. They have led a lot of research on like couples therapy for them, in particular. What's interesting is that social media has increasingly become the place where people get their information. And that's why it's important to talk about this, because are we getting people accurate information? And that matters a lot, particularly when we're talking about something like someone's health, whether it is mental or physical. If we're going to be telling people how they should be living, it's important to think about, like, who's telling us? Is it accurate? Is what they're saying going to be beneficial or not?
Well, and I'd like to point that out, of like what you just said, of like, if we're going to be telling people how they should be living, which again is not generally what counselors do. We've talked about that in a previous episode. So that might be a flag right there of like, if people are trying to tell you this is the way, maybe that raises your ears a little bit and you're like, oh, I don't know. Is it? Is it for me? Because yeah, it's like there's, I don't know, I have sent clients to social media to be like, hey, look at some of what is out there. See what maybe matches your experience, what doesn't match your experience. Like, they already, the example I'm thinking of is someone who was pretty sure they had ADHD, and they didn't necessarily want to do an assessment. They weren't quite ready to like talk to their doctor about it. So we were like, okay, let's start there. Like, look, see what matches, see what doesn't. We'll come back and like talk about it. And so I've used it in that space to help be connective in a way of like, a lot of other people struggle with similar things, or it doesn't look the same for everyone, but there are parts of it that you'd probably maybe identify with. And so use it as a tool, but not not a guide, maybe. I don't know. What are your thoughts? How do you use it?
I mean, I have this joke that I say every time that I bring up TikTok in a therapy session, because I do. Uh, I always say I saw this on TikTok. You know, the source of all good information. And I always throw that out there because I want people to hear that something was on TikTok and think about it critically. Like, think about it through a lens that's not just going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that must be true. But in a way, to me, it's not that different than something like Wikipedia, where we all know that we all go to Wikipedia for our information. And we also all know that Wikipedia is editable by anyone. And so there has to be an amount of, does what I'm hearing actually fit? Is it going to work for me? Is it not? And I mean, this is the other big thing. Being a human is not like a singular experience where it's like, this is the track that we all take. Instead, it's very different depending on the person, depending on the time period they live in, where they live, their socioeconomic status, their race, their relationship status, their families. Like, there are so many variables that play into what is going to impact someone's life and what works for them.
Yeah, the context.
That's huge. When I look at the specifics, when I first saw like the four key points of this article that came out about mental health information on TikTok, it ruffled my feathers. I'll be honest, it did, because I post content on TikTok as a mental health professional. And to be fair, I don't think I've ever used the hashtags mental health advice or mental health tips. If I did, it was forever ago, like once or twice. And I don't think most therapists use those particular hashtags. Essentially, what they found from the 500 posts they looked at was they found, first, 83.7% of mental health advice on TikTok is misleading. And then 14.2% of the videos, actually, they saw things that could be potentially damaging in them.
Oh, wow.
Second thing they found was that 100% of the content for ADHD contained misleading information, which...
And that's of the 500 posts that they looked at.
Yes.
So not 100% on TikTok total, but of those 500 posts, which is a lot. Like 100% of the data sample.
Yeah, that's a concerning number. There are so many creators on TikTok, both professional and not, who make content about ADHD. And I partially think that's because making content on social media is just very well suited to ADHD, because it is a perfect cycle of chasing dopamine. But also, there are a lot of people who have benefited a ton because, as much as like anecdotal information about something like ADHD isn't universal, it is really valuable for people to realize, like, oh, I'm not the only one that does that, and hearing you talk about how you handled it might actually help me. And so I think it's important to throw in there, like, yes, we're not going to find every single video about ADHD directly linked to some researched, like, fully baked data about ADHD itself, but we are going to still find things that are helpful. And then there's also just all of these actual, like, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, social workers who are out there who are talking about ADHD. And I've seen videos that I know are not wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so
do
you want to say anything?
Little bit of energy there. A little frustration.
Can you feel it? To me, partially, this research seems like it was done by someone with a chip on their shoulder against mental health TikTok.
Yeah. What I wonder the intentions of the person who wrote it, and that's kind of when we talk about, like, critical thinking or things that way. It's not just taking that one headline as being truth. Oh, everything I see on TikTok is inaccurate. It's like, well, okay, maybe I should think a little more about the content I'm looking at, like, or take a little more grain of salt with it. So, like, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not. And recognize that they're the people who wrote that. have their own feelings about things, maybe have had their own experiences about things. Maybe those experiences weren't great. Or maybe they just have a vendetta. Or maybe they really care a lot and they're trying to be helpful and they want people to take it a little bit more seriously or not get harmed. And we're human. We all like have our own, again, like you were talking about, context that really matters. So who knows exactly why the person wrote it or how accurate it is. Again, the data pool is 500 pieces. On TikTok, I can imagine there's millions. So that's a pretty small data pool too. And that is with those specific hashtags of mental health tips or mental health advice, which again, like you were saying, I don't know that I have ever used those. I don't know that you have used those, if so, not for a long time. So it's like that also biases the data, who is posting with those kinds of hashtags and things. Yeah, there's a lot to wrap around this article. And part of that is just this like dialogue too, like having a conversation about, that's really interesting that they said that. What are other perspectives?
My neighborhood birds just decided to join the conversation. They have a lot of thoughts about this. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that on TikTok, you have a lot of professionals. Like my TikTok feed in particular is a lot of professionals because that's who I've interacted with. That's who I follow. I don't follow a lot of armchair therapists, as I might call them, where it's like, yeah, people who just have anecdotal experience and no qualifications and no training, and therefore they're just like, here, this is fact. But I think it's interesting how quickly we generalize things, like how quickly we generalize it to be like it's all bad, or nobody is qualified, or none of this is helpful, or anything that's not actually taking into account really the variety in our experience.
It is interesting how we do that, and it's incredibly natural that we do that. As far as I understand it, that's one of our mind's tools to reduce the amount of energy we spend on things, which over long periods of our existence has been incredibly helpful. So it's just efficiency. If I can categorize something as good or bad, then I can put no more energy or effort into thinking about it, into having to do something about it, into, again, putting more energy into understanding the context or how it matters for me in this moment or how that person was thinking, or, it's an energy tool. And while that was really helpful for humans over many periods of time, much of our history, and may still be helpful in some ways, today in the world, most of us are not shy of food, of a place to sleep, of things that allow us to reset our energy. We aren't chasing after bear or deer or things like that on foot. So we don't necessarily need some of these tools the mind uses of efficiency or for efficiency as often, and now they can be more detrimental if we don't actually start to choose to use our mind and spend the mental energy. I don't know. What do you think?
I think like humans are incredibly adept at generalizing. Like you're absolutely right. And that is something that can actually be detrimental. Interestingly enough, because for a lot of situations, it can be really valuable. Like if you get attacked, let's say you did live somewhere where there were a lot of wolves or something, and you got attacked by one, your mind is able to, without even like consciously realizing it, generalize that, okay, I should watch out for wolves because if I see one, it might attack me. That's very valuable. Instead of having to be like, each wolf is an individual creature, maybe I shouldn't be afraid of this one.
But this one's cute.
But the generalization that we do, where we immediately take information. You know, like, oh, this should apply to everything. This should apply to my entire belief system, my entire functioning, my entire, like the entire way that I interact with food or anything else. That can become very unhealthy very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's a big part of why we have to be really careful with this. Because particularly like when you look at content on social media, content that tends to do well is content that's either presented very believably or in a charismatic way or something that makes it relatable so that people watch it, resonate with it, and then want to do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
And none of those things have anything to do with accuracy. None of those things have anything to do with like whether or not this is a good idea. Like just think about like a cult. A cult exists based on those same premises, that there's somebody who's able to do all those things in a way that they get people to follow them, and it's crazy.
So, how do we navigate it?
One of the things I love is I love when any of my clients sees something and then brings it to therapy. Like I even have clients who will send me clips from TikTok, from Instagram, which is always very funny because I'm like, oh, hello. But I love that because it's like, yeah, you saw this thing, it resonated, you related. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the parts of it that do fit, that don't fit. And let's not just walk into it and assume, oh yeah, this random person who's on my screen for 60 seconds is right.
That's similar to how I was talking earlier. It's like if we're not ready to take those other steps, let's explore what's out there and see, again, what fits, what doesn't. And just kind of open our mind up a little bit to what could be or how you feel about what could be, or how you feel about this resonating with you, and then bringing it back in. That's part of it. Is not just going out and being like, all right, well, look at social media and you'll figure it all out. It's like, go check it out, and then let's talk about it. Let's bring it back in and see, how is that helpful? How is that experience of connecting with that helpful to you? Or how is it not? Is it now with a little more confirmation or potential confirmation of a diagnosis or something, because a lot of it resonates? Now, are you ready for an assessment? Or can we look through the DSM and actually see which there's a whole other thing on the DSM we could talk about that for a long time, but for today, of what like is something that we as counselors have to do, we could look through the DSM and see what the requirements are, or the criteria, I guess. So it's part of the puzzle, but it's not solving it.
One of the pieces to what they found that I think is really interesting is that they said that while experts concluded that 54% of the advice contained accurate information, only 31% contained inaccurate information, which that doesn't totally make sense based on the claim that 100% of the ADHD ones were inaccurate, unless that was only a small percentage of what they looked at.
Well, and you did say it was misleading.
Yes.
Or that's the word it sounded like they used. So how are they defining these terms too?
Also a great question that I didn't dig into the study enough to
yeah. Well, and a lot I don't know if they would have even defined them. Some studies will, and that's very helpful, yeah. But some don't.
A purely academic study has to.
Yeah.
Like any key terms have to be defined.
Yeah.
But I don't know that this one is purely academic.
Yeah.
It seems kind of like this study might be driven by clickbait. You know, it's a big accusation to throw out, but that based on how it was published, in the numbers, in the charts, and the graphs that they put in there, and all of the graphics that are like, that's very fear-mongering. It does feel a little bit clickbaity.
That's fair.
But I think it still does pose an important question, which is, how do we know and what do we do with it? Mm-hmm. And I think, kind of going back to what you were saying, it's really valuable for people to be able to connect with things that resonate, that help to maybe gradually move them in a direction of more self-understanding, or arguably almost more important than self-understanding is being able to live more effectively.
Mm.
Because I think there's also a really key piece here, which is that if you're not open to new information, that's problematic. And it's really easy when you decide I am defined by A, B, and C. It's easy to then not be open to it if somebody's like, well, what about D, E, and F?
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the that's honestly been one of the things that I've experienced in working with people that does cause me a little frustration. Is when somebody sits down and they're like, I'm an expert on this, and this is why I do these things because I saw a video. Because I'm like, well, sure, like we can start there, but we have to be open to more than just one plausible explanation or one way of functioning.
And sometimes too, again with our mind in liking efficiency or tending towards certain patterns of negativity or um, things that way, sometimes we can get stuck in that. We're like,
Mm-hmm.
this is how I am, and I can't change. And it's also what one of the filters I love to use for myself with new information is like, how is this helpful to me? How is it useful? Um, how does this help me do what matters to me in my life? Because it's not necessarily just understanding or knowing more about yourself, but it's like, how does that understanding serve you? How do you use that understanding or navigate it so that it doesn't get in your way as much or in the same ways for you to do what matters in your life? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think we get to the point of it's like, oh, I've arrived. I know what the answer. I got the diagnosis or something. And it's like, okay, that is, again, a piece of the puzzle. Maybe that's really helpful so that you can stop shaming yourself about forgetting things because that's just the way your mind works. And now, how do we use that to experiment and find ways to navigate forgetting? And again, maybe it's giving yourself some grace when it happens, knowing it's probably going to. We all forget. Some people more than others, though. And then, like, yeah, how do we use that information to move us forward?
Like as you were talking about that, one of the things that came to mind is that I love it when people on social media talk about their terrible experiences in therapy.
Mm.
And the reason I love it is because, I mean, A, there's the drama, and I'm human, and so I'm like, ooh, this is interesting, like, share more. But also I love it because I'm constantly trying to learn as a therapist. And so I want to hear, like, what are therapists doing wrong so that I can make sure I don't do that so I can improve. And I think there's a lot of value there. But a generalization, like I go in the comment sections on those videos, and a generalization that is always made in them is this is why all therapists are awful and evil and terrible and you should never go to therapy.
Mm.
And like that's a great example of yes, if you are in a situation and your therapist does what this person is talking about, change therapists. By all means, fire them, be done. But don't write off therapy because of negative experiences that some people have had with therapists who could ideally use more training. And I think that's like that thing that you said around how you look at something and you're like, how is this valuable? Like, what does this benefit? Where does this improve my life? I think that's such a key thing that we miss sometimes. It's like, oh, I heard this thing that seemed like it was valuable. It's like, well, okay, well, how? Well, I don't know. It just sounded good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, you gotta take that extra step of asking those questions.
Part of that I wonder too is like, where is the space for that in people's lives? Like, where? Because when it's just us and our phone and we're scrolling, like where do we get to then be like, oh yeah, I heard this thing. What do you think about this? Or, I've been applying this to my life, which maybe you haven't. Like, maybe you try it on and see how does this work for me? Does it work for me? And then you talk about it with your friends, or maybe you don't have friends you can talk about that kind of stuff with. Maybe where do you get to ask more questions or be curious or yeah, explore some of these things?
That brings up a really interesting thing in my mind. It's like the idea of social media based on a somewhat misleading title, social media, is that it's supposed to like connect people socially. It's supposed to be creating bonds, inspiring conversations. And that feels a little bit misleading based on how social media companies are like, how can we get you to be spending more time looking into your phone, not actually talking to people? But also, like if we look at counseling as a profession, counseling is built on social constructionism, constructivism. There's constructionism and constructivism, and they are different. And I lost a point on my dissertation for using the wrong one. One is research based, one is like conversation. It's a whole thing. We don't need to get into it. But
So one of those ones.
what matters is that counseling is built on this idea that if two people or more have a conversation, we're exploring knowledge and we're building our understanding. We're essentially building knowledge. And if you can take what you're seeing, if you can take the content that you're consuming and you see something, you're like, oh, that was really interesting. If you can actually bring that into conversation with people around you, there's a lot of potential benefit there. Not just to you, but also to them, and even just the practice of exploring analytically. Because anytime we're talking to someone about something, we usually, disclaimer, not always, usually are thinking more about whatever it is that we're talking about than if we're just scrolling for hours and hours and hours without actually interacting with anyone or with any actual part of the material that we're consuming.
Because of the way the apps and the algorithms and things work, I wonder where this confirmation bias shows up too.
Mm-hmm.
And how, if we have people who think like us, who see the world the same way we do, how sometimes we can get further narrowed, even if we are sharing. So how can we share in a way that opens it up, maybe, versus narrowing us into our own belief system?
Yes, that's a really good point, because confirmation bias will have us looking for information that confirms what we already believe. And because social media does that, it becomes the echo chamber where it's like, oh, we know you believe this, so we're going to give you more and more information that just tells you the same thing. It is a system that does kind of predispose us to not being open to new information, which is kind of dangerous. And also just another reason to always practice thinking about things analytically. Like if you hear something and you're like, oh, if that's true, that changes everything. Don't just believe that it's true. Explore it. Try and understand it. Like look at who's saying it. Look at where they got the information. I mean, we have so much information at our disposal. It's not that hard to verify if something has a solid base or it doesn't.
And what do you mean by a solid base?
Ooh, that is a great question. When I think of whether or not something has a solid base, I'm also thinking about does what this person is saying, like, does it seem like it's at all based in something that could be kind of tied back to something healthy? Like, does it tie back into wanting to take care of myself or wanting to be loving towards myself or others, or something that is intrinsically rooted in what we mostly can agree on as being kind of healthy tenets of being a human? I'm looking in my mind for an example of something that I've seen that wouldn't fit that criteria, and nothing is coming to mind, which I know is not helpful. But also, I think it's still really valuable to always be asking those questions. Like, does this align with my values? Does this align with what I believe to be healthy functioning?
Well, and I wonder, in that, kind of coming back to like those questions of like, is this useful, or how is it useful, and trying to look a little deeper of like what's the motivation, what's the intention. So if I have a post that maybe incites a lot of energy or emotion in me, and I want to believe it, like, can I even notice that I want to believe it? And like, okay, what's the motivation or intention of that person or that post? Is it to incite that energy in me? Is it to like have me do something to feel a certain way? Or So I feel like at the base of most of this is curiosity, and kind of where we say good or bad. And this is why I love, like, this is building on some of our previous conversations. But what if instead of using good or bad, right or wrong, we can open the gray area a little bit and use some of those descriptive terms of, again, like, can I describe the way that this post is and I am interacting? Like, I do notice a lot of emotional energy right now, or something like that. Instead of it being like, this is right, or like, I just believe this, it's like, how does this make me feel? How, I wonder if that's what they're aiming for. How is it helpful? And just kind of leaving a little bit of space in between when I consume this information and when I decide that it is something I now believe or is true or not. Can we give a little space for more information? I mean, if it were an experiment, that would be what we would do. We would have some kind of stimulus. We'd have some kind of data going, so that we could understand, like, does this confirm my hypothesis or not? But it can be really simplified in our lives, again, of like, let's see, and just like wait a little bit until maybe I have more information that, oh yeah, that seems to confirm it. Okay, let's see. And then if enough information comes late, you're like, yeah, seems about right. That works, or that works for me.
One of the things that comes to mind, especially as you talk about doing like research and experiments, is that the more you learn, the more you realize that there's not a lot that can be totally definitively said, particularly when it comes to humans and human functioning. That's why they call it a soft science, or that's why some people call it soft science, because it's like, yeah, there's variety here, there's variance. But one of the things that you find is that the most educated people about it don't ever talk about it definitively. They don't ever say, if you are this, then you definitely are that. Instead, it's, if this is present, then maybe there could be that. And there's so much more of that openness to the gray. There's openness to the fact that there is variance here. And just because we love the idea of causation, we love to take a correlation and assume that it is causation, doesn't mean that's actually accurate.
And again, bringing some compassion to it. Like, of course your mind wants to go black or white. Again, that's a tendency that we all have. It doesn't mean you're good or bad. We don't need to judge ourselves for it. But can we also hold it a little more loosely? When I notice my mind doing that, can I step back and like wait or pause even?
That is, again, a fascinating part of how we function as humans. Because going back to earlier, we love to create relationships that aren't necessarily there. And so we generalize things, we look at it and we're like, this caused that. This always applies to that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, part of why we do that is because we love the black and white, because there's security there. There's certainty in being able to say definitely. But also, the more you explore, the more you learn. It's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the more you learn, there's a long period where, as you're learning, you start realizing how little you know. And so with learning comes a decrease in confidence for a long time before you've learned enough and you start to rebuild that confidence.
I felt that in grad school for sure. I was like, oh God, I know nothing. I often say that with my partner. I'm like, I know nothing.
That's such a valuable attitude to hold, though. Because where we make the most mistakes is when we assume we know. Like, as therapists, in kind of coming full circle back to this original idea of is information accurate, where therapists do the most harm is when they decide that they know how to live their clients' lives better than their clients. When they start to impose their own values, when they start to impose their own decision-making tree onto the clients to be like, hey, this is how you should be living your life. You should break up with that person. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. And when we do that based on our individual context, it's very lacking. and it can create a lot of problems.
Because there's no one right way to be human or one
Mm,
right way to live your life. As my supervisor would say, there are many right ways. And I love that he
mhm,
brings that instead of being like, um, instead of there's no right way, it's like, no, there
mm,
are many. There are many right
mhm,
ways to do it. And that's where that context and that how does this apply to me and my experiences? And it does take a bit of like slowing down because our mind wants to work so quickly. And it does. And it is immediate if we haven't practiced a pause or taking a deep breath or creating space in between that stimulus and that response or that
mhm,
reaction. If there's no space there, then we don't have much choice. Um,
mhm,
but we can create a lot of space there, and it can be very
mhm,
valuable to do so. So that instead of when we see things on social media and people are saying this is how you do it, and then you try that and it doesn't work for you, and maybe you think you're broken or you're wrong or something's wrong with you, it's like, no, you're different, and maybe
mhm,
that doesn't work for you, and that's
mhm.
okay. There are many right ways. So,
One of the pieces to that that I think is really important to always make space for is that when you're trying to figure out how to define who you are, what you're going to do, how you're going to live, it's really important to hold that with an open hand. Because I think we get really caught because society wants us to on this idea of like, I have to be a defined, like a perfectly defined person.
mm,
And my style and my choices and my personality and all these things. And it's like, no, like one of my favorite one of my favorite kind of ways of thinking about even just personhood is this idea that we are all kind of like rhombuses, where it's a shape with multiple different sides of different lengths. Like each part of the shape that has different sides is no less part of the shape, even though they may look different from each other. And that's who we are as humans. Like depending on who we're around, we do act differently. We do have different parts of ourselves that are drawn out, and it's really valuable to be able to hold those openly.
I think too when you're saying about like being the having the perfect style or things like that, like how much of that is actually you or
Mm,
how much of that is driven by this desire to have a specific identity, to want other people to see you in a certain way, and
mhm,
really how much of that is driven by people wanting to sell you stuff. Because I
mhm,
know I've fallen into that trap. You can look at the stickers on my car. You can look at the things like, and I've been noticing that more recently where I have like a Christmas wish list and there's things on there that I'm like, why do I really want this? Like, yeah, I do love sparkles, but also like, I kind of want people to see me in a certain way, or I don't know.
mhm,
There's a lot of, it's kind of fun in a way to just start wondering, to
mhm,
start like being curious of like why do I do that? Like why do I feel a certain way when I buy a plant? You know, or like
mhm,
why did I buy the plant? Why did I want to buy the plant in the first place? Like I don't know. So there's a lot of fun in that, or can be.
mhm,
Some of it can be kind of painful to look at the sides of ourselves
mhm.
that maybe we don't love. And as humans, I think we all have those sides too.
This brings up in my mind one of the things that I think can be both beneficial and or detrimental about social media,
Mm,
because you can see a piece of content that could very productively make you question part of yourself.
mm,
Be like, oh, yeah, let me re examine that. Let me explore more and learn more.
mm,
Or, and this is one of the pieces that I think has the potential to be kind of detrimental.
mm,
It can make you question yourself in a very harmful way,
mm,
where it's like, oh, if somebody made a video that said, if you do this thing, like let's say if you're a people pleaser, you definitely experienced childhood trauma at the hands of your parents.
mm,
Like you watch that video, if you're a people pleaser, suddenly you're sitting there questioning, like, oh no, is my belief that my childhood was good and my parents were kind, is that wrong?
mm.
And that can take people down down a very dark spiral very quickly, because it's not that it's necessarily untrue or true, but it's that it's something that's offered without support. Because a lot of what we do in therapy is like, yeah, let's explore these things, but let's do it in an environment where you are supported and safe,
Mhm.
and where we're not just going to be like, so you might have had a traumatic childhood. Anyway, have a nice day. Goodbye.
So yeah,
Like,
good luck with
the,
that.
there needs to be that additional context around certain things because that's more ethical.
Yeah, and that's again where this like all of the social media we consume, like are we choosing what we consume? If you were to eat, this was another like metaphor that in this book they used. It was like if you ate food that made you sick, you probably wouldn't continue eating that food. So with social media, if you're consuming social media that doesn't make you a better person, doesn't move you towards your values, doesn't move you towards your goals, or even just doesn't make you feel good, which there's a little bit of space in there for like um we don't always need to feel good. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable and that can be really healthy too.
Mm.
But in general, like, are we choosing and being intentional in the media we consume, or are we just consuming all of it and taking it all in? And how does that make you feel at the end of the day? Like, do you feel worse about yourself? Do you feel better about yourself? Do you feel like, again, is it moving you towards your values or your goals? Like, there's a couple of those filters that maybe aren't so helpful. Try them on. I don't know which ones those are for you.
Part of what you said there that I think is really interesting, though, is that we are drawn based on how our brain neurologically functions with dopamine and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We're drawn to pursue things that feel good in the moment, even if they feel bad afterwards.
Ooh, short term versus long term. Or
And I think we get that a lot from social media because either like I'm going to see something that went like if I watched you live a lifestyle that I dream of having, while I'm watching it, my brain will be living it very slightly. And so it will produce the reaction as if it was mine for that brief moment. And that feels good. Until I close my phone and look around and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't have a Lamborghini. That feels bad.
Yeah.
So what then happens is we scroll, we doom scroll, and we're like, feel good, feel bad, feel good, feel bad, feel good, feel bad. Need to swipe one more time to feel a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Similar with chips or candy or things like that. Again, very sweet and gets that dopamine. It's exciting or it tastes good. And over time, if that's all you consume, or even sometimes, gosh, you just consume a little more than you need or want, and then it does not feel good to your body. Yeah. I appreciate that distinction.
One of the therapists who I follow on social media, she just posted something about starting to run, which I resonated with because I have, in the last month and a half, I've started to run.
Nice.
And she talked about it through the lens of like, this has been a really valuable learning experience for me because it's really hard. And there haven't been many things that she talked about in her life that were hard in the same way, where it was like, this is really hard, and to get better, it's just going to be really hard, and I have to work at it and sweat and do all the things. And I think there's something there where it's like, there are a lot of things in life that are not a pleasant experience, but they bring a lot of value. And like right now, I go running and I'm out there like gasping for breath. And I know that there's a huge benefit for doing it. And it's so hard in the process. And social media doesn't make us do that. Social media is like, oh, just swipe one more time. You'll feel better. One more is going to have the answer. One more is going to change your life. One more is going to make you feel better. One more, just one more.
Yeah, I so value and appreciate that you brought up that short-term versus long-term, because that is another, like, again, kind of trap of the mind that we get into, and that we've learned, I guess marketing has learned, social media has learned, that is a thing that we do. Like, we sometimes get caught up in the short term of things. The same, very similar with drugs, with alcohol, with tobacco, nicotine, any kind of drug really. One of the big reasons people get addicted is because of that short term relief. You get a little bit of relief, you change how you feel for a little while. And meanwhile, over time, the long term effects on their health, on their family, on their connections, on their life can be really incredibly detrimental. But that
Mhm.
little payoff is kind of what their mind focuses on. And so
Mhm.
part of helping people choose something different is zooming out and seeing what are the long-term effects too. Can we at least hold both of those?
Mhm.
Because I'm still going to eat a cookie. Like, probably am.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm probably not going to eat 12 cookies because the long-term
Mm.
effects aren't helpful. So can I look at that? I could eat 12 cookies over 12 days.
I mean, if you do, you could always blame it on the dog.
There you go. See, but that doesn't help my
Which
body. I'm not gonna get
there's
in trouble for it. I'm an adult. I can do what I want.
there's there's a Christmas movie
Oh, okay,
that just
okay.
came out this year that's very funny that has that happen.
Okay.
Um, but I believe it's called Our Little Secret. It's
Oh.
really good if you're looking for a Christmas movie. Since everybody who's listening to this, this is going to come out way after Christmas, so
Yeah. So go back and rewatch. Yeah. Christmas in January or February.
one of the things that came to mind as you were kind of processing that is that if I was to tell somebody this is what I want you to think about when you're consuming content and you want to determine if this is content that's accurate or helpful or maybe misleading or harmful, if someone is offering you a quick fix to something related to your mental health, to your relationship, to any part of your functioning, hold it carefully. Because as much as you can consume a very valuable piece of information quickly, actually applying that to your life is going to always generally be hard. Like a great example is there are so many pieces of content about relationship, many of which I have put out there, where it's like, hey, if you want to improve your relationship, practice this element of listening to your partner.
Mm.
And that's short, it's easy, it sounds like it'll be a quick application, but then when you actually go to do it, it's not, because your brain is like, well, this is not how we normally respond. This is not how we normally listen. I'm not practiced at this.
Mm.
And so it actually takes a lot of effort. So if somebody's telling you, hey, here's an easy thing that you can do that will change everything instantly, be cautious.
Mhm.
But if somebody's like, hey, this is beneficial, but it's hard, like I would actually tend to trust that more.
And back slightly just to the short term, long term, am I willing to go through some short term discomfort or put in some
Mhm.
effort for a long term benefit that could be really, really valuable? I like to think about helping future me out. And like present me is making future me's life much better. or
Mhm.
or when I have something happen that past me figured out, I'm like, thank you, past me, for going through that hard work.
Mhm.
Get present me where I am today.
It's huge. It makes a big difference.
It does. Hmm.
So based on our whole conversation,
Hmm.
if you were tasked with actually doing something to combat or change or alter the landscape of social media and mental health information.
I apologize, but the most exciting thing I've ever had happen, maybe not the most exciting, there is a little downy woodpecker. I'm so sorry, but I'm like a bird nerd, and there is such a cute little downy woodpecker on my suet feeder right out my window right now. And that is
That
the
is amazing.
coolest thing ever.
I
Oh
I
my
love that,
god.
especially because with how you started. Okay, this is a great example about how everybody experiences things differently.
Yeah.
But with how you started, I'm like, is there a moose in your backyard?
That would be
There's
cool
a
too.
bird. There's a bird on my bird feeder.
And it is
That's amazing.
a
I love
very
that.
unusual bird. I apologize for interrupting
Oh,
you.
no need to apologize.
I've only seen
It's
one
great.
other one in my yard ever, so that was really exciting. Okay, go ahead. I would
That
like
is very exciting. I
Thank you for bearing with me through my birding phase of my life,
Oh
which
no, it's
might
great.
be the rest of my life. Probably will
It should
be.
be. Birds are amazing.
I
And while I
agree.
may not love them as much as you seem like you do, I love that for you. Going back to the prevailing question, if you were tasked with trying to alter the social media landscape around mental health,
Yes.
what would you do?
Hmm. Is this like I have a magic wand and I can fix it, or is this like I'm
Oh,
giving people advice on how to navigate it?
I mean, I want to say the magic wand one, but that
Mm,
doesn't feel as productive as the advice one.
that's fair.
But if you have both, you can give both.
I think one thing that could be really valuable to most people um, is clarifying your values. What matters to you? Uh, what is what are the qualities of the person you want to be? Like, is that being trusting? Is that being caring? Is that being kind? Is that being, I don't know. These are just words that come to mind. It could be honesty, reliability, dependability. It could be a lot of different things for you. Um, but can you get a list of like 5 to 10 of those that are like, if I, on my deathbed, at my funeral, and people were talking about me, these are the things I'd want them to say as how I live my life.
Mhm.
Can I let that guide me? And whether that's in social media or other areas of my life.
Mm.
But then when we have that and we can see, maybe we use that kind of as a compass, when I'm scrolling, when I'm going through social media, how is that moving me towards my values? How is that helping me move towards that person that I want to be? So if it is finding balance, maybe the person I want to be has balance in their life, um and that looks like, yeah, I'm spending 10-20 minutes on social media as a relaxation or as just for fun. I just enjoy it, um as a break, or like, but I'm doing it intentionally. I'm not doing
Mhm.
it to avoid other parts of my life, or I'm not doing it to distract myself from the hard feelings. So can I know my values, and then there comes the pause to like check your intention when you're doing things. Is this moving me closer, or am I just trying to change how I feel?
Mhm.
I'm curious what you'll say.
I mean, if I could magic wand it,
Mm-hmm.
I think I would do actually something similar to what YouTube has done,
Mm.
which is they've created and I'm sure it's not perfect, but they have created a credentialing system where if you are a professional,
Mm-hmm.
you can get that tagged at the bottom of your videos.
Mm.
And so there now is the capacity for there to be this distinction between like this is random 18-year-old couch therapist and this is somebody who has devoted a lot of their life to studying this and supporting people in this, and like there's training and education and credentials, which I realize that whole system is not perfect. But I think having something implemented like that is a really positive thing. And then I would agree. Like slow down. If you see something that resonates, like filter it through your values. Actually think about it analytically and explore it instead of just being like, this changes everything.
Mm.
I think that's a really important approach to take for a lot of things in life, but particularly when you're being handed information to use to change things about how you're living. It's very valuable to think about that instead of just accepting everything you're told.
And this is where we slightly plug therapy. Maybe we have through the whole video. And again, we're slightly biased, but for the most part, like, it's what we've chosen to do with our lives because we believe it brings value, and has a
Mhm.
lot of value for the people we work with. If you have some of those things that show up that you identify with that might be like, well,
Mhm.
what if this does change everything? There's space, um, in counseling or therapy to explore that further. Again, like you said earlier, with the support that can be valuable. Um, Not every counselor is going to be helpful to do that. As we talked about too, they're also
Mhm.
human. We are also human, and imperfect. And there is likely someone nearby that you can connect with and talk to that feels safe to do that. And then you can bring those things up and start exploring
Thank you all so much for being here, for listening. If you've made it this far, we
it.
appreciate you. If you have thoughts, you want to give comments, leave comments, whatever the proper term for that is, feel free to do so. We are we are accessible. We will read those, or or more specifically, our editor will read them and tell us about them, and then we'll read them.
Yep.
Um, and a shout out also then to my lovely wife Kathy, who does all of the editing and posting for this.
Thank
She is
you.
incredible. And until next time, this has been the space for it. Have a lovely rest of whatever time of day it is.
Yes. Last comment. If you guys have things you want us to talk about, or explore, I would love to get some of those, because that's what this is for. bringing the space for it. So thank you for listening.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you'll listen again.